All right. Well, hey, welcome. This is Grognards of Gaming. I'm Phil Chase, and I'm joined here with my good friend of many years.
Rob Patron, the Grognard Dog.
There we go. Hey, well, this is a podcast that's dedicated to our experiences and memories in role playing games.
Yes, this is our origin story podcast. So Phil and I are going to talk about how we got into gaming, what kind of gaming we evolved from and to, and so forth. So Phil, why don't you start? I'd love to hear your
Sure,
origin story.
sure. My origin story. Okay, it's kind of a little bit of an interesting one. It was basic D&D and advanced D&D, but with a little bit of a nuance. So I think what happened was I was gifted the advanced D&D books too early. I was given them at a Christmas by my older brother or my older half brother, and he had heard. Right, this is like if I was 7. You have to imagine it's about 1979, 1980. He had heard that this D&D is a big thing. Now he didn't play himself, but he had heard. He got some kind of like hot tip. What do you get your little brother for Christmas? Well, how old is he? About 8. All right. You know what? Get in these books. So if you can imagine, for Christmas, I got the stack of D&D books. Like I got the player's manual and like the player's handbook or something like that. And I got at the same time I got a couple of advanced D&D books. I got the basic set. Like you remember like the set that was all like a box
Yeah,
set
the
had
red
B2 in
book.
there, right? Right. I was at the red box, right? So what had happened was my brother didn't know to differentiate the systems. He didn't know much about it. He just thought this would be great. And so I couldn't really read them too well. Right. Now, basic was a little easier than advanced and Dungeons and Dragons, but I remember opening this big book and going, all right, this is for adults. Like, I just don't think I can handle it. So away it sat on my like bedroom closet for years. In fact, I confess to you that for many years, I don't even know that as a kid, I didn't even know that I owned advanced D&D. I really didn't. I really didn't even know what I had. Right? Isn't that
I can hear
crazy?
Galadriel's voiceover right now. There it sat in
Exactly.
the closet.
Right, right. And there were some things that the books did not intend. And like they fall out of my closet, and I'm like, dun 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 dun. Right, exactly. What's this? Um, so so exactly. That's kind of how it was. Like the books came up. They had a will, and they called me. But so away they sat in some closet collecting dust for many years, and it wasn't until like I want to say it was like fifth, sixth grade. Now that I think about it, I think it was middle school, but it might have been late middle even. That somebody said one of my neighborhood friends had said, "Oh man, like D&D, we got to get into that." He had heard it, but this was in the early. Now it was like a few years later. So like everybody was playing it, right? And I said, "Wait a minute, I think I have those." He's like, "No way. Will you learn it? And can we play?" And so his name was Matt. Matt and I opened up the book that was the easiest for us to learn, which was the red set of D&D. So that was amazing. And I remember, I tell you, Rob, I remember distinctly feeling really like strange sense of awe, but like a light twinge of guilt that it had sat away in my closet unlooked for so long. I thought, oh my gosh, I didn't even know what treasure I had. So we made a character or two. And we're just like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. So my origin story with D&D is a little accidental, right? It almost didn't take with me, right? I could have easily just sold them at a garage sale and then like been a Lego man for all my years. Like I don't, what do I know, right? Yeah. So that was youth. That was youth. And I've got a couple of memories from high school, but mostly in college. I'm going to get back to them, but I want to ask you, how about you? What was like your earliest landing, if you will, in role playing games? I've always wondered about because you and I are roughly the same age. We've known each other for a long time, but I didn't know you like as a kid, as a young kid. So how about you?
Right. Yeah, you grew up in Michigan. I grew up in Philadelphia, so we didn't meet
Mm-hmm.
until we were in New York together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So for me, I had heard about Dungeons and Dragons. I think around eighth grade. In fact, there was a kid in my class, Kevin, and he was into Dungeons and Dragons. I was like, oh man, that sounds so cool. It's everything I love. It's got dragons and I wasn't necessarily into dungeons, but I was into dragons
Right,
and
right,
treasured swords and sorcery and all
right.
that.
There you go. Yeah.
That's so awesome. So, I desperately wanted to play it, and I think I even had approached Kevin about it, but it just never happened. And then I graduated eighth grade. That took place in eighth grade. I graduated eighth grade and went off to high school. And then in high school, I used to carpool with some kids in my neighborhood, and they were all freshmen like me, but one of them had an older brother who
Hmm.
was I think a sophomore, junior, and he had played Dungeons and Dragons, and I was like, oh
Mm.
man, I really want to play. And he's like,
Yeah.
yeah, we went to school in a van. Their mother had a van. So we were like, well, maybe can you bring the books? And it's a half-hour drive back to Philadelphia from our high school. Can you bring the books? Maybe we'll play in the van. He's like, sure, sure. But again, it never happened. So one day, I'm walking home from I guess, where the heck was I? I guess they dropped me off. Oh yeah, I think I know what happened. The van was driven by someone who lived about a block away. So I was walking that block back to my
Mm.
front door, and who do I see? But my friend Mike. Now, Mike and I weren't really friends so much at that point, but we knew each other
Okay.
from grade school.
Got it.
And
Okay.
Mike was still at grade school. I think he was in eighth grade at that time. And my very good friend Pat, whom you know, he was also a little younger than me, and Pat lived on the street behind me. So Mike was walking to Pat's house, and he's passing my street as he goes, and he's got this book
Hmm.
bag, over his shoulder. And I'm coming home from school. I got my tie on, my suit jacket and everything. I'm coming home from school,
Nice.
and I see him, and I'm like, Mike, you don't live in my neighborhood. What are you doing around here? And Mike was like, oh, I'm going to Pat's house. We're gonna play this role playing game together called Dragon Quest. And I was like, oh, holy cow! Wait for me there. Don't start. Let me go
Ah,
home and drop my bag off
yeah.
and get dressed. And I'll
I'm in.
I'm in, and so that's what happened. I went home. I got changed. I jumped the fence over to Pat's house. Knocked on the door, and I
Yeah.
went in, and Mike played a game, ran a game of Dragon Quest for us. And
Wow.
that was my touchdown.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Wow, that's so
Yeah, and
cool.
it was funny. I still remember, I I didn't really understand the tropes or the paradigm of medieval sword and sorcery. And
Right.
I think my character had some sort of magical abilities. I could conjure things, and so I wanted to, to make a hole in a stone floor or something like that. And
Hmm.
Mike was like, "Well, how are you going to do that?" And I was like, "Well, I can conjure. I think I could conjure acid or something." And Mike was like, but acid won't eat away stone. And I was like, well, and I had taken like first year chemistry or something. I was like,
Right.
well, what if I conjured the acid between the molecules of the stone? And Mike was like, what? And it was just crazy.
Now you're
Yeah.
out of paradigm.
Oh,
What are you, like a
yeah.
sci-fi guy? Well, get out of here with this knowledge. Yeah,
Right. We
right.
heard the siren of the paradigm police pulling
Right,
up.
right. It's interesting because a couple of themes come up in both of our stories, but I have one right there just thinking about how you try to problem solve with acid, and you tried to work with the best of your kids' knowledge applied to a situation that was completely fantastical anyway. And as I've heard it said that D&D is I've heard a couple of fun things about D&D. And one of the things is, like, you're a band of what's called murder hobos, and I remember hearing the word murder hobos, and I just went blind with laughter. I was like, for some reason that really sticks, because there's these vagabonds that just seem to, they go from place to place, and they solve problems. But a lot of what your characters end up doing, and the conversation you have, must needs be built off of the knowledge that you personally have. And I remember that a lot of things I tried to do or wanted to say in the game or whatever were based on something I had read or thought about, but it was actually an aberration of medieval life. It really, if you look at, if you're like a medievalist, you know that people just didn't live like this. So, for example, somebody later, many years later, pointed out, well, this plate mail that D&D says you have, that's actually a 15th century thing, or 16th century thing, whereas chain that didn't really have until 12th century. And I'm just like, all right, look, Killjoy, like, get out of here with your face. But some of those, early childhood, like middle school kind of adventures. I mean, looking back at it now, Matt and I had the dumbest things happen in our game. They would never really. It was just nobody would. You didn't, but we didn't care. We just went with whatever stupid idea we came up with.
Sure.
So your idea of acid, I would have, if you and I had met as younger kids, I would have called that very sophisticated. I would have said, man, that Rob, he's a champion role player. He knows about acid. Yeah, that's what I would have said. I mean, come on. But like, it's
Right.
cool to think about what we, kind of like what we back then, what we did to make the game work, and we didn't really care, and it was maybe about something else. Um, so the something else I wanted to talk about, because I think it came up in both of our origin stories, and I want to kind of explain. I want to tell you a bit more about high school and college for me too, because it has the same theme, and that is of relationships and networking. So you describe somebody else who you met that got you in. A chance meeting, coming out of a van, going, "Hey, you're playing, Dragon Quest. Let me come over." But before that, you were talking about how it was always some other kid, right, that knew how to play, and you're like, "Oh, I want to get into it." So I would have been that kid had I read my D&D modules earlier, right? But some other kid said, "Hey, this is really cool. I've heard about this. I brought you in." So what I think is fascinating about that is that our origin stories, and I think a lot of gamers out there have that guy, right, that got them into it. Or they were that guy, sure, but like more often than not, they have an Eddie Munson. Now, I don't. Are you a big Stranger Things fan? You tell me. I don't think you haven't watched Stranger Things.
I have. I'm going to lose credibility in the first episode of our show, but
I don't think so.
I've seen season one and loved it. I just
Great.
never got around to watching the other seasons. And my children tell me, Dad, you have to watch the latest season because
Yep.
it prominently features Kate Bush, whom I love.
Oh, it does. Yes. Yes, it's right, because
So
the
I'll
last
watch it.
season that one of her songs becomes really a key
No,
a
no
key
spoilers.
trope. I won't say anything. No, but she dies in the end. Kate Bush dies. No, I'm joking. I'm teasing. Of course not. No, no,
God!
no, no, no. She lives. She lives. No, anyway. But no. But Eddie Munson. I think I described him before. I won't give out too many spoilers if I say there is a kid that's a D&D player in the most recent season. But the reason why he's so iconic is he's the older kid we always wanted to hang out with that would teach us how to play the game.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this: in like high school, college, so as you got a little older, were you the kid that introduced the game to others, or were you still one of those who had heard about the game and got introduced by another person?
Right. No, I was, I got introduced to the game by Mike, and to this day now, Mike and I are about as close friends as you can get. So,
Mhm.
so Mike got me into the game, and I didn't really introduce others to the game. I never, look back in it's different now, but back in the '80s, being a tabletop role player was something you didn't reveal. You didn't come out as a gamer because it was considered to be, at least in Philadelphia, it was considered to be very nerdy.
Very nerdy,
And
very
yeah,
geeky.
and so you
Yep.
keep it under wraps. So I didn't go around like advertising that I was a role player.
Like a
But
shirt. You didn't have a Hellfire Club shirt. Yeah.
no, we didn't
Yep.
have a Hellfire Club shirt,
Yep.
but there was a Hellfire Club at my high school. There was the Strategy and Tactics Club, and so I remember attending a meeting or two of the Strategy and Tactics Club, and there was a kid there. I think I was a sophomore by that time, so this kid was a freshman, and he was a practiced dungeon master, and so he was running a game at one table, and I decided to sit in a couple of times, and it was fun, but. I didn't really, get to know him or really get into the game very much. Really, my high school years. I mean, then I started to become interested in girls, and I had a high school sweetheart, and so
Mhm.
I really didn't really game at all during
Yeah,
not
that'll
too.
ruin your gaming career real quick.
Yeah, that'll ruin your game. Yeah, yeah. So I high school was really like my gaming dropped off. But
Interesting.
yeah, but I had a core group of friends in the neighborhood, and we gamed, and so it was Mike and Pat, so those two guys, And then our friend Paul, whom you know, Paul and I are
Hmm.
still very close to this day. Pat and I
Yeah.
are very close to
Yeah.
this day. Paul moved into the neighborhood. He joined the game group. Then Mike's cousin Kirby moved into the neighborhood from Michigan. You met Kirby
Hmm.
when
Yeah,
you
I
moved
met
back to
Kirby.
Michigan.
Yeah, he was great.
And
Yeah.
so the four of us, the five of us, I guess, we did some gaming up until like my high school sweetheart and I started
Hmm.
to become serious, and then I didn't really
Hmm.
game too much anymore. But
Hmm.
then what happened was, I guess this was the very end of high school. It must have been after I graduated. So now we're moving on into college, my early
Sure.
year of
Yeah,
college.
let's do that.
When I was
Yeah.
18, I was hanging out in the neighborhood of my high school sweetheart. She lived about a mile away from me, and there were a group of boys, my age, who lived in her neighborhood, and I discovered that they were role players, and one of
Yeah.
them was
See,
Steve.
your network
Steve.
expanded. Yeah, quite
So
organically. Yeah. Yeah, that's
right,
interesting.
so I said to them, "Oh, hey, I played I played a little bit of Dungeons and Dragons, and my dad I'd like to play with you guys." And so I did. And even after my high school sweetheart and I stopped seeing each other, I was still going back to her neighborhood
That's
to game with
awesome.
these guys.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
That is awesome. So that's again a very similar kind of story of the organic network around gaming starting, even against other influences that would otherwise dampen your games, like a relationship, right? But I mean, yeah, I mean that's why gaming is such a strong thread in our lives, and that's still keeping us talking. For example, we've known each other for years, but we've moved to different cities, and we're still talking. Heck, we're doing a podcast based on what are we doing? Well, role playing. It's kind of a common denominator for a lot of things, but it's a very strong thread that I think can really bond people. That was my experience in high school and in college. And just to paint you a quick thumbnail, uh, my high school, you said something that really kind of resonated and kind of was my experience too. I didn't really go around advertising I was a D&D nerd.
Mm.
I had the advantage though. It's funny, strange advantage of going to a gifted and talented high school, and everyone was a nerd, but we had our own strata, right? You couldn't be. You had only be certain flavors of nerds, right? If you're a Shakespeare theater nerd, you were automatically protected. You were actually at the higher caste, right? I was like, man, I don't know what I was doing in high school because I mean, who does, right? Yeah. But I remember I had there was just some solace that I had taken in bringing D&D books in my backpack, and at spare moments in the library or when I had like a study hall, I would pull it out, and I get a couple of people teasing me, but I was like, whatever, I'm doing this D&D stuff. And so even against maybe some of the teasing or some of like the ostracization, I still did it. And I mean, I think it just speaks to like, the need for an escape or how strong it was. But really, I didn't really find anybody in my high school that did it. My high school years were happily role played through from the Middle Earth role playing system by ICE. And it was because a couple of I was very close with a few of my neighborhood friends. So you mentioned some people at school, but you also mentioned some neighborhood friends, which I thought was perfect because it was also my experience. I had a little network in my neighborhood, and back in those days, before we had jobs and important things and families, we had plenty of open time. Well, what do? Well, with your open time, you go to some kid's basement. Mine, I loved being a host, so they come over to my house and we play downstairs. My dad had a real estate office in our basement for a few years, and so he had like nice carpeting, nice lighting, a really great table down there. And so we would role play. We did a little bit of D&D. We did a little bit of the basic and expert D&D. I remember us doing that, but I don't remember exactly how. And I think it was a chance finding of one of the early Middle Earth role playing editions at a local hobby shop. And I think if I remember correctly, I brought it to my friends because I had read Tolkien's books, and well, I had really chopped through them. I don't know if I read them. I think I slaved through them because I'm not a big reader, but I think I did kind of push myself through them. And this role playing game with it's heavily it's like very overdeveloped tables and and a lot of details. It spoke to like something snapped. I was like, all right, this is the role playing system for me. And so I remember introducing it to my friends, and that took me years and years. That took me all the way through high school and into college. But so the Middle Earth role playing was something that I played for many years, and as it happens, I did find a couple people at college that knew about the Middle Earth system and had to play it themselves. But that's actually not the game that hit with my group in college. The game that hit with my group in college was Ars Magica Second Edition, and there was a magical moment. And I'm gonna take you back to this. I think you're gonna love it because I think you'll like this because it really. Speaking of origin stories, because you and I are going to talk about Ars Magica a lot throughout
We are.
our conversations. I can feel it. You know.
Ever so slowly. There's Ars
Yeah.
Magic second
Yeah,
edition.
there you go. There's Ars Magica. That's a third edition book right there. You got
Oh,
there, my
is it?
friend. But yeah, no, but you got it. You got it. In fact, I'm seeing behind you, as our cameras are on. I'm seeing some of the favorite systems that I know we're going to talk
Yep.
about in a later
Yep.
podcast. But the Ars Magica system was found because myself and my friend Ed had gone to our local hobby store in Grand Rapids, Michigan, Ryder's Hobby Shop off of 28th Street. And we stopped there because we had this crazy idea. We had no real agenda, but we had met a few months before, and this would have been the spring of 1990. And I was a freshman at Calvin College, now Calvin University. I'll have you know. But at any rate, I was a freshman and he was a junior, so he's a little older than me. So he's one of these little older guys that influenced me with my gaming, right? He taught me a lot of things. But Ed and I were in the store and we knew we wanted to have something to read on the train. We had planned to take an Amtrak train from Grand Rapids, Michigan to Toronto because we thought Canada would be really cool. And we heard that the money is really interesting and has a lot of cool colors. And you can get a lot of Canadian dollars for the American dollars. So we thought, let's go there, rent a hotel, then we'll hang out and walk around the city. I'd heard a lot about Toronto. So here we are, these two like dumb college kids, just me and him. We're gonna take a train. We needed to do something on the train because we knew we had to pass like several hours. And so there at Ryder's Hobby Shop, peeking out of some rack, was the Ars Magica Second Edition. And I picked it up, and there was something about it. I was just like, this looks different. This looks like something new. And he's like, yeah, what is that? And I paged through it, and already I could tell it was a different kind of role playing game because it wasn't hack and slash, right? It was high fantasy. The thing that got us both was that it was set in mythic Europe, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I turned right to the page. And I'm like, Ed, dude, wouldn't this be great to actually figure out a place in the world and that's where our wizards and people are? And he's like, dude, that sounds awesome. So I confess to you, I think we spent 45 minutes under the watchful and nervous eye of some Writer's Hobby Shop retail guy who's like, are they going to buy something? Right? We sat there and oohed and ahhed over this thing. And it so happens that what caught Ed's eye was all the Latin terms for the magic because he studied Latin and Greek all throughout his college and later in his graduate school career. So he actually knew a lot of Latin. He was like, I respect the system. It uses Latin. We're like, oh, cool. So on the train and then at the hotel room, we barely left the hotel room. We did walk around and have some food, but we didn't really see Toronto. We actually just sat and talked about Ars Magica. And by the time we had by the time we had arrived back from the train ride back, we had a whole couple of ideas to present to our group. So we were the ones who catalyzed Ars Magica and brought it to our role playing, our gaming group. At the time, we just had done some board games and stuff together. And so that's my origin story of Ars Magica. It was like this little seed pod of an idea that grew from me and Ed taking this trip to Toronto.
Oh, that's beautiful, and that's
Yeah.
kind of it's Ars Magica that I kind of come into your story.
Yeah.
So yeah. So for me, high school, as I said, I didn't really game too much because I had a girlfriend, and then I went off to college, and then eventually my high school sweetheart and I stopped seeing each other. But I was still playing Dungeons and Dragons with these.
Mhm.
I started playing Dungeons and Dragons again, but with these
Mhm.
guys from her neighborhood. And that was AD&D that I was playing with them, and my core gaming group from the old neighborhood, we had gone from we started. So Mike started us off Pat and me with Dragon Quest. But I think we only really played one session of Dragon Quest because I think in our minds, Pat and I were like, well, this, it's just kind of like a rip off of D&D. We want to play actual D&D. So Pat and I remember we went to the mall together with his older brother, and we actually bought the basic D&D set, the red box,
Okay.
and Palace of the Silver Princess. We bought a few
Oh
modules,
yeah. Oh,
and
B3. Yep. Yep.
and then when that core group of Paul, Mike, Kirby, and Pat and me, when we were all together, we transitioned to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. We started playing that. But you mentioned your book bag with the books in it, and that
Yeah.
reminds me of how
Yeah.
we went from D&D to other gaming systems. Is I also used to host a lot in my basement when we would play, and
Yep.
Paul would always come over with this really heavy bag. Like all we had was just like the few. We had
Right.
a few books, whatever you had, like the
Hey, what do you
players.
need? Right. Yeah.
But he would come over and he would like plunk, he'd plunk this heavy bag down like a briefcase every single time. And like after about 3 or 4 times of this, we're like, dude, what do you have in that bag?
Yeah.
And
What? Yeah. Right. Right.
I think we like literally pushed him aside and started rummaging through his bag. And we pulled out, I think it was me actually. I think I pulled out Star Frontiers. And I was like, what?
Oh, what is
Because
this? You said. Oh.
well,
All
I know what
right.
it was because you may recall that it was advertised on the inside back cover of the Red
Yes.
Book.
Yes,
And I
and
was
in
like,
many Dragon magazines, by the way,
and
too.
many
Yes,
Dragon
but
Quest.
yes.
And I was like, there's a science fiction role playing game out there,
And you're like, ah.
I didn't have it. We didn't have the disposable income to buy it, but Paul, it turned out, had it. And so then we went into all of these other systems. I think, in my basement days, we also tried, maybe it was Marvel superheroes. We tried that a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Top Secret. We played Top Secret. A lot
Oh
of the
yeah, Top Gun. I remember that. Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, but then by the time I was in college and returned to AD&D with the guys in my high school sweethearts neighborhood, we were just playing AD&D again, and we sort of did that, and then in college again, I was more into just going out on dates with girls, and I had a
Sure.
cadre of friends in college, and we
Mm-hmm.
would do stuff. So occasionally I would play AD&D, but it was my gaming years really didn't really flourish until I graduated college, graduated graduate school, and I left Philadelphia to go to New York City to get yes to work in New York City. And Kate Bush, as I mentioned earlier, she has a song, uh, uh, to the top of the city, and there's a line in the top of the city. It's the loneliest city in the world, and it's so true. Like New York
Yeah.
City, there's gazillions of people there, and you're like
Yep.
shoulder to shoulder, but you
You're
don't know
still very
anyone.
alone. Yes,
And
I
so I
remember
said
that
to
feeling.
myself, well,
Mm-hmm.
just make an effort to meet people. This was, before really the internet the internet was still, I think, DOS in those days. And
Yeah.
and I was like, I'm going to go to like the Complete Strategist, which was the gaming. There was a Complete Strategist in many cities. Had been one in Philadelphia. There were two in New York City at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I'm just going to go to the Strat, and I'm going to hang up a poster, advertising. I'm a GM. I'm a player. I'm willing to play pretty much anything. And a certain excellent gamer GM with whom I now
Gee, I
podcast.
wonder who that is. I wonder who that
Saw,
is. Yeah.
saw my post, pulled one of the little tags, and
I did.
contacted me. Uh, and
I did.
you guys were playing Ars Magic, so I'll leave it to you.
Yeah.
Explain how Pete and Chris and that whole gang, George.
Yeah. Speaking of networks, yeah. Speaking of networks, and truth be told, I actually took your card right off of the wall. I actually had because the Complete Strategist had a notebook system where you could look things up. But by the time that I had met you, they had done these little cards on the wall, and you had filled out the card. There wasn't really a tag, so I just said, "Well, I'm going to take this. I'm going to see what this guy's all about." And I'm glad I did because that was the genesis of our Ars Magica gaming group, which I think we should cover in a future podcast, actually,
Yeah.
because there is so much that we remember about that. But you would ask me about how I met some of the other elements of that group, George and Peter and Chris. So just to briefly paint an origin story of that. Again, networks, right? It's again like meeting somebody who you know, but getting out there and meeting. However, in this case, it was nowhere near my. I called you. That's true. I took that action. You are right. But to have met any gamers in New York, and to your point about it, sometimes being the loneliest city in the world, was lucky when I came to New York. It was my wife and I, because my wife Dana was enrolled at Columbia and she was studying French, and so I did have somebody I knew. But it's funny because even now we talk to our oldest son Auden, who's moved to Indianapolis, and he actually has been saying recently, he's like, it's kind of hard to meet people just like he's not going to go to a bar, right? He's just not that kind of type. So like, what do you do to meet people? And where has he gone? He's gone to his friendly local game store to meet people. And I'm like, that's the way to do it, kid, right? That's what I did. The old man did it. It's good enough for me. It's good enough for you. But in this case, that network was formed because Dana had actually talked me up to a barista and a coffee shop, cashier named Adam Worson. And she had conversation with Adam because she would come into this coffee shop and bakery that's no longer there. It's actually on Amsterdam Avenue, way up by Columbia. It's no longer there. But she came in after classes and they got to talking, and she said, well, my husband's going to be moving here soon. He just found a job. He'll be here later on the summer, whatever, to start the school year. And they got to talking about me and my love of games. And he's like, well, I'm a big Magic the Gathering player. And my wife's like, I don't know if he plays that, but he'd probably know of it. Well, of course, at the time, I was a huge Magic the Gathering player because everybody was. Oh, my goodness, right? So, so Dana introduced me to Adam, and Adam then introduced me to this fantastic group that would meet at this tiny craft apartment on Christopher Street, and we'd all sit around these little tables and play Magic the Gathering, and that's where I met Chris, and that's where I met George. And then as for Peter, I think I don't actually quite recall. I think Peter had come in a little later. No, maybe he was part of that group. Now that I think about it, either that or he was a friend of Chris's. There was
He's
some
like
other
Tom
network that
Bombadil. He
was
always
made.
was and always will be.
Yeah, yeah. He actually walked out of the forest for like, "Hey, what's up?"
Yep.
And there he was. So the origin story of the Arse Magic Gaming Group is, I think something that we're going to want to talk about in another episode, because I think between you and I, we have so many deep memories of story arcs, characters,
Mm.
scenes. I mean, even I don't have them here in the room. You can't see them behind me because they're not up here. But downstairs on my main floor, you'll actually be delighted to know. Just last week, I found the correct size of a poster frame for our Ars Magica Meridian map, which I didn't realize I still had because I hadn't, like, it was dumb, but I hadn't looked behind some corner of my house, and sure enough, I had carefully preserved that map. Of course I did. I just didn't know where I put it. So I took it out, and last week I actually put the frame around it. So you and I have so much of a life that's been invested in those memories. I vote that we take some future episode to talk through our favorites of just Arch Magic. We'll do that a little bit later. But I think, Rob, I tell you what, I have an idea for our next podcast. I think we've got some good origin stories here. I think people are going to hear that. But I did notice that when we were talking earlier, you brought up some Ars Magica third edition books, and behind you I saw the Fate book, right? And so you and I have also bought our Fate. I think what we should do is the next episode. Yeah, there it is. I think let's talk about our favorite systems, because I think that's going to give people a good overview as to some of these terms and names and titles that we're throwing around. Because another origin story I haven't really introduced yet is Star Wars. And Star Wars was another, like the West End Star Wars D6, another one that you and I know really well. And that was another game I played in college. So I think we'll keep it all for favorite. Let's do favorite systems for next episode. How do you? What is that? How's
That
that sound?
sounds great. That sounds great. This was a
Good.
lot of fun, and And I really
Yeah.
enjoyed hearing your origin story. And I want to just end with something our mutual gaming friend Jason once said. He said,
Ah,
you know,
yes.
he said gaming with folks, it creates this really strong bond. Like
Mhm.
even after I ended my relationship with my high school sweetheart, I'm still friend. I still gamed with these other guys.
Right.
And he postulated that that's because you go on all these adventures together at the
Mhm.
table physically, but in your minds and in your hearts, you're really doing all this stuff together. You're
That's
really
exactly right.
brothers in arms, and I couldn't
That's
agree
right.
more.
That's right. It's the shared memory and that bond that brings is very important. Heck, that's why we're doing this right now.
Right on.
All right. All right, right on, brother. It's great to have talked to you. Next week, we're going to do favorite systems, and I will see you then.
See you then.
All right, buddy. Have a good night.
See you. Good night.